right here on AM 1300 WMEL, the Talk to Me station, sponsored by AVET Project. Folks, we are talking about a very important subject, and that is our war fighters and how they're dealing with the residuals of all these concussive blasts. We hear it on the news almost daily about the IEDs. We're losing soldiers left and right to these ridiculous, these inhumane devices that these cowards over there are using to try and really kind of pull the rug out from under our troops.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, because you get these IEDs and that's what's in the news. Nobody is making the transition in the news to talk. That's a perfect lead-in to talk about the potential problems that can have with traumatic brain injury, and that's sad and an indictment of the American media, as it were.
Well, especially when we're going to be seeing more and more evidence in our regular daily lives out there in good old America, when we hear that these soldiers, and I think we're seeing a little bit of it start to surface already. I don't want to paint them with this broad brush that, gee, if you've been in combat, you're going to be a disaster mentally, because that's just not the case. However, we do need to address this very seriously, and Dr. Scott Fairchild is kind enough to drop in today and share a wealth of his information and knowledge with us. And we've got a special guest, a man who's definitely out there in the veterans community pushing for a cause to bring attention to issues such as TBI, PTSD, and another one that we call CTE. Boone Cutler, are you with us?
I'm right here.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, I understand you're a pretty busy man. You've got your own radio program going on. Tell us a little bit about your history, though. You're a prior war fighter. Give us some bio on your situation.
My situation, I was in Iraq when I was civic service in Starter City. I was injured in a mortar explosion in 2005, about 3, maybe 4 months after I got there.
He's going to have to speak up.
I got medevac not too long, 2 years ago.
Boone, if we can have you speak up a little, our connection's a little weak here.
Okay. What do you want me to do?
just speak up, and we'll make sure and get it out there. So in 2005, you suffered this injury, and then you went to Walter Reed to recover, and you've done a lot since then. But how was your recovery, and what kind of issues did that bring about?
The issues that stem from that, and I'll be the first person to say, and I tell people this all the time, because if you were in a blast, and even if you weren't cut up or just a blast would itself cause injury to the brain. I was in a blast. I wasn't wearing a helmet. Last May, I was also diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, secondary to the blast-related injury, post-concussive syndrome. So these are things that people really, really need to be aware of. If you were in a blast and you had your brain rattled, you just need to be aware that there are some other things you need to consider.
That's good advice, and those are issues that you're dealing with that are invisible to the average person. But when you get in an environment like Dr. Scott Fairchild, who's you may not know, but he's a retired lieutenant colonel from the Army and a practicing psychologist now with Baytree Behavioral Health, who's joined us on American Warrior Radio. He deals specifically with warriors like yourselves. Are you able, as a soldier, having experienced all this, to readily open up, or does it take some prying from the caregiver?
I spend quite a bit of time opening up and putting myself out there, so it's not as difficult for me as it would be other guys. But I have my limits too. Ask me whatever you want to ask. I'll be happy to talk to you about it.
Well, Doc, is that pretty standard, your experience with the vets?
Absolutely. Once you establish that initial rapport, it's so important to be able to move forward and getting that initial rapport down and connection. And I find that most vets are very, very open with the things they need to discuss. And I think Mr. Cutler had some great comments in that, you may not have experienced any outside injury, and you may not want to come forward because you've got what we call foggy brain or fuzzy thinking. But it's so important not not just to improve your immediate focusing and concentration and get some help with that, but it's so important for your future because, again, once you experience a traumatic brain injury, you are at much greater risk for, like he said, for Parkinson's, for Alzheimer's, and actually for dementia. So you may not experience those initial symptoms. You may just shake your head and say, I've got a foggy brain and some word-finding difficulties, but down the road, it may get much worse, and it may get much worse much quicker. So it's very important to have a good, comprehensive, thorough evaluation, as we've talked about, to be able to see what parts of the brain are working well and what parts aren't, so that we can remedy it, so we can make some inroads. And I don't know if Mr. Cutler's had a chance yet to participate, but one of the things that's been profound in making a difference, and we've heard of it and used it with the NFL and the NFL studies, is hyperbaric oxygen treatment. Getting in those chambers, taking a dive. It's amazing to see the improvement. When we have areas of the brain that aren't functioning, it's like having little sleeping cells there. They're just kind of lazy. But when we put somebody in a chamber and they're getting exposed to oxygen at 15 times the perfusion rate, or at double the pressure of our normal atmosphere, all of a sudden the oxygen just blows right into those cells. It wakes them up, and we get people reconstituting. In fact, I have scans, images before and after hyperbaric of our NFL players, and their anecdotal stories about getting back so much function. It's amazing. And we owe that to our veterans. We owe our veterans the hyperbaric oxygen treatment, which I understand DOD and VA is just now beginning to look into. But we have that available right in our own community. We have 2 chambers right down on O'Galley Boulevard, and we can get people in there and start getting some improvement in their abilities.
Sounds phenomenal. Boone, has that been your experience? Has anybody offered you that type of therapy?
You know, when I was home on leave from Walter Reed in 2000, I don't remember when it was somewhere between 2006 and 2008. It was in the beginning, though, and a friend of mine that was a doctor had reserved 10 sessions in a hyperbaric chamber for me, and this was in probably '06. And I did feel like at that time it did stop. It gave me a little bit of. It did stop whatever was happening and started to help a little bit. I felt it was helpful, but sadly, even Walter Reed didn't have anything like that. It doesn't make any sense to me because, as I was told at the time, this is very old technology, but I don't know why we're not using it.
Well, Boone, what kind of, besides that, what other kind of help works the best for you?
Good question.
What's the best for me?
Yeah, what works best for you in terms of relief or help or
just general coping methods or skills?
Hatred.
Well, if that's what it is, that's what it is. But I got another question.
I have pure unadulterated hatred for the way our American warfighters are treated, the discrimination they put through, the way people piss and moan in this country about how everything is bad. And you got guys like me who deal with, even our families are sick of us half the time because of all the stuff we're going through. And, I think that every one of us needs to have a little bit of hatred just to tell everybody, hey, screw you. You're not going to defeat me today, not on this ground.
Good for you.
And just keep moving forward.
Good for you, Boone.
Is that a good motivator?
Oh, good for you, Boone, because it is a motivator, and again, getting some of that anger out, because unfortunately, as you know, Boone, as well, as you go around, you sometimes think that in your community and around you, people just don't get it. I get out there and I try to challenge people. I'll ask them, they'll say, oh, we support our troops. And my usual next question is, what do you do to support our troops? And, well, I have a bumper sticker. And unfortunately, I think in our country, because, they don't realize the cost of a price of freedom. And I think a lot of times, people's support for our service members is about as thick as a bumper sticker, and that's about it. So we like to motivate them, and sometimes it's through anger, of course, through constructive anger. Whether it's getting involved with the powers that be and letting them know. Educating the community is so important. Educating the community and constructively working out that anger, whether it's over at the gym or wherever it may be, and writing letters.
I think that's fine and dandy, but forget about the constructive stuff. How about some destructive anger? How about telling the entire world that, you know what, hey, I don't need you. I can hang out with my warfighter family, keep your freaking bumper sticker, and stick it up your ass. I'll hang out with my warfighter family, and you know what? The 23 million veterans in this country, we'll just come together and we'll start running things our way. You keep your bumper sticker, keep your pity without promise. I don't want it. How about that kind of anger?
Yeah. And it motivates you, and it gets you together, and hopefully it gets something done. It gets something done.
Well, leads me into a question, Boone. You've obviously got a lot of experience in dealing with the ramifications of being a disabled vet and how it's perceived in the general public. We see it on the news every night. There's another story about an IED blast and our soldiers being affected by it. How do you think, what's your perception of the general public's awareness of the problem?
I think the general public wants their free Obama phone and doesn't give a damn about the real problem.
What about how do you deal with it in terms of dealing with your fellow veterans? Do you feel most comfortable around other veterans and not very comfortable around anybody else?
Typically, I will only hang out with war fighters.
Right.
I think really they're most of the time they're the only people even worth my time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on the phone last night with a war fighter who's crying in his beer about how his family doesn't get him and how they don't understand. I finally get fed up with it and I go, you're right, they don't understand. So why are you even there?
Mm-hmm.
Go somewhere where there's a bunch of war fighters. Go someplace where people do understand you. Why live in a conflicted world? Do not assimilate. Do not be part of this population. Be part of your own population with the people that understand and care about you and who get you. When you go, hey, listen, I wake up in the middle of the night and I see faces that I don't want to see, you got 10 other guys going, yeah, me too.
Mm-hmm.
Big deal.
They understand you. They understand you. They understand you.
But isn't there a resistance sometimes, Doc, to a group therapy environment?
Well, some individuals would prefer not to be involved in group therapy, and we have to do some individual work with them. But
because they want to isolate. They feel like what Boone was talking about. Some of these soldiers just feel like nobody understands them, so they just withdraw.
I would like to ask Boone if he's been exposed to or is aware of Soldier Hard and some of the work that he's been doing. He sings about PTSD. Have you heard any of that?
Oh, yeah, I think I know that guy.
Hey, there you go.
Soldier and I are pretty close. I was actually in his video on Valor.
Excellent, excellent. And what do you think about that? I mean, it's a way for veterans to connect across the country and around the world. The work that he does, Jeff does a great job with all of his work, and I tell you, I'm sharing it all the time in my office with all of the veterans who come in, and building a greater network of veterans. And and he does a good job also of educating the public and educating the community.
He does a fantastic job, and here's what I tell guys: that everywhere around the country, there are vet centers. They're set up everywhere. And yeah, they were set up by the government, but that doesn't mean you have to buy into all that business. It just means get there, because that's a rally point locally for you to find warfighters in your area.
Good point.
Sound of my voice should be going to a vet center for no other reason than it's a link-up point. It's a physical place to rally.
It's an excellent idea, and in fact, that's where you can exchange phone numbers. That's where you can make the buddy list. That's where you can connect, and I highly encourage that as well. That's a great recommendation, Boone.
Now, Boone, I want to ask you another question, and I know Glenn's got some input on this. In dealing with the VA and getting your disability compensation, because I always tell people, as a retired legal advocate myself, this is essentially an implied workers' comp agreement. You're not on the outside. If something happens to you and you're working for IBM, you're going to get workers' comp. Well, this is not an entitlement program. This is a benefit you earned through your service to our country on the battlefield. What's been your experience? I know you're going to tell me there's been ups and downs, but specifically, you mentioned you've been diagnosed with a secondary condition, Parkinson's, secondary to the post-concussive syndrome. How is that going? What kind of progress are you making with that?
They've got it in my VA medical file, but it hasn't made it into the VA, corporate file. I've got some more paperwork that needs to be done. And you know what? Quite honestly, it could have been done right now. But the VA is so backlogged and so understaffed because Congress won't pass a budget that guys who have claims that should take 3 months are taking at least 9 months now. We got families in breadlines because of administrative errors at the VA.
And Glenn, can you speak a moment about how this can, I'm not going to say streamline, but how it can go smoother as far as those nexus statements from medical providers?
Yeah, probably the key thing in any secondary claim, and in your case, Boone, of course, the secondary claim is that your Parkinson's is secondary to your TBI, your post-concussive syndrome, as it were, and it is a statement from your primary treating physician that at a minimum it's as likely as not that, in your case, the Parkinson's is being caused by the experience that you had that caused your TBI. And was something like that included so far in your claim that's being processed?
That was recently included, but just so everybody knows, my claim is going to be different because I'm already rated at 100% without the Parkinson's. And so the only thing adding the Parkinson's is going to do for me is that if I die as a result of that, like choking or something, people with Parkinson's a lot of times they choke and they die, then my family will get a different benefit after I pass on.
Absolutely.
Let me share a little something with you on that, though, Boone. Even though you're at 100%, sounds like scheduler, and I'm not going to get into the specifics on this, but if you're 100% scheduler and they find that you have another service-connected disability that's 50% in and of itself or greater, guess what? You are entitled to what's called additional compensation under SMC, Special Monthly Compensation. In your case, it would be SMC Level L, as in Lima. So that's just a little nugget that I'm going to throw out there. And I know the VA will work your claim accordingly, and let's hope they do it correctly. But just a little feedback for all you other folks out there that are sitting at 100% and maybe are diagnosed with a cardiac condition that warrants a 50% evaluation, you could and should be eligible for additional compensation under the Special Monthly Compensation Codes, Glenn.
Yeah, exactly. That, in fact, that would be the housebound rate.
Housebound.
And it is additional compensation, and what translated, that means additional money being paid to the veteran in recompense for their disabilities and the impact it has upon, the debilitating impact it has upon their lives and their ability to work.
Well, this is a lively conversation, and Boone, I'm so glad you're a part of it. Doc, what can you say about a warrior coming to you with these kind of issues? They've got TBI, which the VA is behind in recognizing and, as Glenn mentioned earlier, really getting a hold of and diagnosing it correctly and rating it correctly. What do you do as far as these nexus or causation statements for secondary conditions?
What we do is very, very good documentation and quantitative documentation with the psychological testing, also with the QEEG, also with the SPECT imaging. The SPECT imaging produces a complete picture of your brain, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. I remember once I included the SPECT imaging on a Social Security eval or a VA eval. I put the pictures right in the report. It's very visible to even a fifth grader that there's been some damage there, as opposed to asking this question, that question, or the other question, when you can physically see. In fact, I had one person look at their brain imaging and look at it and say, oh my gosh, it's my brain, it's not me. So also we talk about stigma, the stigmas attached to mental health and mental illness. There's a whole paradigm shift right now. In the old days we were looking at mental illness. Now people are coming to realize that it's a function of our brain. Our brain isn't functioning correctly. And when we can see how our brain isn't functioning correctly, it takes the stigma off our young warriors. It's not their fault, it's not their issue. I mean, yes, it's still their issue, but they don't have a responsibility for it. It's like having the wiring not working effectively in your vehicle. It's time to take it in, get it assessed, get it repaired.
Does that make sense to you, Boone?
That makes good sense to me. I don't have a whole issue with mental health at all. I think every American needs to take whatever precautions or whatever steps they need to take to remain mentally fit, just like being physically fit. It's all the same.
Sure.
Whether it's working too much or PTSD or alcoholism, whatever those core issues are that are keeping you from being mentally healthy, you need to get your stuff squared away.
And I want to mention at this point, we talked about Soldier Heart, who's a 10-year, 3-combat tour vet. He does the intro music for American Warrior Radio, and folks, you got to check him out. His record label is Redcon 1. Just dial up Soldier Heart on Google, and you're going to get all kinds of samples of his music. Support these warriors because they're really out there spreading the message. Okay, they've got music, which is great, but they've also got a message woven into their music. And if you give it 10 seconds to listen to, you're going to find it's right there on the surface. But one other way that vets can help cope, and certainly one that I think you're probably using, is getting involved in furthering the issues of veterans situations. Now, you're involved in Veterans in Politics International, Boone?
I've resigned from them, but yeah, I still stay pretty involved with different political situations.
And you have your own radio program. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have a show on KKSC 99.1 Fox News Radio, Northern Nevada. It airs 3 p.m. or 1500 hours on Saturdays. And I've got plenty of archive shows on YouTube if anybody wants to check out Tipping Point with Boone Cutler. There's plenty of shows there.
That's the name of the program, Tipping Point?
Yes, sir.
Well, I personally know that because I've listened to them, and they're very entertaining and informing. I mean, it is, and you bring in a whole lot of different perspectives, but there's one common or central theme, and that is that we gotta support our brothers and sisters in arms.
Absolutely.
We do, and sometimes just throwing money at it is not the complete solution. We know that in the past 4 years, the VA's budget has increased by 43.8%. That's a substantial increase in a time when other budgets are getting cut throughout our government, and we have to keep the pressure.
Problem solved. We threw money at it, right?
We threw money at it. Congress approved it. That's the largest increase the VA has gotten in its history. But unfortunately, where is that money going? Can we get the medications that we need? Can we get the types of treatment that we need? Why do we have to wait 30 days to get a mental health appointment? Why do we have to wait another 30 days to get back in?
30 days? Who's getting in there in 30 days?
They're lucky. They're lucky. Maybe 60 days for the initial and 30 days for the follow-up.
Let me bring up some other factoids in there. You talked about the largest increase in the VA, 43%, largest increase ever. But look what they've done over the last 20 years. They haven't even maintained the standard of the care for any warfighter for the last 2 decades. So this $43,000, all that did was get things to par. We haven't even begun to deal with the influx of the warfighters in the current war.
Correct.
So that's all paper tiger to me. I don't even want to hear those numbers.
But they're not using it effectively. And the point I was making was that our people need to get to our congressmen and representatives and say, what are we doing with what type of organization do you know in a civilian world that would get their budget almost doubled in 4 years and still has these poor stats to report on not being able to get our warfighters in for care?
Folks, we have been joined.
The reason I did is because they threw that 43% increase on it, and today you guys should be happy. We threw the money over it. But like I said, all they did was get things to a literally a bottom line par, and forget about the influx of warfighters for the current war. They haven't even addressed that subject yet. We are at the point right now where things were being maintained 20 years ago, not how things have needed to increase over the last 10 years.
I hear you, brother. And listen, we've been talking with Boone Cutler. You can check him out at www.991fmtalk.com. That's 991fmtalk.com. Dr. Scott Fairchild, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to mention real quickly, Space Coast Community Law School, free. We're always bringing free stuff to the listeners. The next course, 10, 11, 12, that's this next Thursday, Criminal Law Panel. You don't want to miss it. It's free, folks. You can check it out at sccls.com. We appreciate you all joining us for this episode of American Warrior Radio. We will be back again next week, so keep this station tuned into your dial. And as always, Glenn,
Don't forget, thank a vet.